Welcome back, everyone. I'm Jordan Giesige, and this is The Limiting Factor. In the last video of the nuclear series, I showed that even if solar, wind, and batteries get dramatically cheaper, a grid built strictly from those technologies would result in electricity prices that are much higher than a grid that uses a splash of clean, firm generation. The best two options for delivering clean, firm generation are combined cycle gas turbines and nuclear. And so far, gas turbines are winning market share, whereas nuclear generation is relatively flat. That's because natural gas is cheaper and faster to deploy. The question is, will that change in the future? Will we see a renaissance in nuclear power? Possibly. There are new nuclear reactors emerging that are cheaper, safer, and faster to deploy than the reactors built decades ago. They just need investment to reach scale and drive down their cost, which could very well materialize. For example, Elon Musk is hatching plans for 1 terawatt-hour of compute, which is roughly equal to the entire output of the U.S. grid. Such ambitious growth plans from Elon and others could provide the sustained high prices and investment environment necessary to develop new reactors. So today, I'm going to walk you through the basics of those new nuclear technologies and the bull, bear, and base case for nuclear power in the coming decades. Before we begin, a special thanks to my Patreon supporters, YouTube members, and Twitter subscribers, as well as Rebellionaire.com. They specialize in helping investors manage concentrated positions. Rebellionaire can help with covered calls, risk management, and creating a money master plan from your financial first principles. For this video, I'd also like to thank Nathan Iyer of the Rocky Mountain Institute, Jesse Pelton, founder of Type 1, Matt Smith of Rebellionaire, Stephen Bigalski of the Georgia Institute of Technology, and Lars Liesdahl of Rystad Energy. This video couldn't have been made without their insights, but as always, any errors are a reflection of my attempt to simplify and communicate a complex topic. Note that this video will be focused on nuclear developments in the United States because most of my audience is US-based. There is, of course, exciting things happening in China with energy as well, but that would require its own separate video. To kick things off, there's a lot of excitement about new nuclear reactors that are cheaper and safer, which are collectively known as advanced nuclear reactors. To understand what advanced nuclear is and its benefits, let's start with light water reactors, which have been the mainstay of the nuclear industry for almost 70 years. In a light water reactor, such as a pressurized water reactor, water is used, among other things, to cool the reactor core. That water has to be kept at high pressure to keep it in a liquid state, because if it turned into steam, it would lose its effectiveness as a coolant. Then, the coolant from the core is run through a heat exchanger, which feeds heat to boil lower pressure water that generates steam and drives a turbine that generates electricity. The drawback of light water reactors is that they require a constant supply of water to cool the reactor core. If the flow of water stops, the reactor risks a meltdown, leading to boiling water, a steam or hydrogen explosion, and the release of radioactive material. As a result of the inherent risks of light water reactors, the cost of nuclear power in some jurisdictions has been steadily increasing since the 1970s due to regulation and increased safety standards, construction delays, and financing and insurance costs. The primary goal of advanced nuclear reactors is to make nuclear power cheaper and safer. As a result of that loose definition, advanced nuclear reactors as a category is pretty broad. It includes everything from improved versions of light water reactors to more exciting reactor designs like molten salt reactors and even fusion reactors, which probably warrant a video of their own. In the case of improved versions of light water reactors, the increased safety is achieved through passive safety mechanisms that can cool down the reactor core in the event of a power outage, more robust containment for the reactor core, and better monitoring and control systems. Although those features add expense, the nuclear industry is also working on standardizing those light water reactors, reducing their size, and increasing their production volume to counteract those costs. That's a promising approach, but the advanced nuclear reactors that have most captured the public's imagination are what's called fourth-generation reactors. Fourth-generation nuclear reactors are designed from the ground up so that a nuclear meltdown is impossible. There are dozens of fourth-generation nuclear reactor designs, but let's look at a molten salt reactor as an example. For a molten salt reactor, rather than water being used as a coolant, as the name suggests, a salt mixture is heated to its liquid or molten state, which is then used to heat and boil water to drive a steam generator. That molten salt is not only used as a coolant, but also contains fuel, such as thorium, to drive the nuclear reaction. That thorium salt mixture, in turn, interacts with graphite moderator rods that increase the number of nuclear reactions that take place. A molten salt reactor creates a number of safety benefits, but let's look at just 3. First, due to the fact that liquid salt has a much higher boiling point than water, it doesn't need to be pressurized to keep it in a liquid state. That means the risk of explosion is all but eliminated. Second, as the molten salt heats up, it expands, which reduces the fissile atom density of the fuel and slows down the nuclear reaction. That means the reactor should never overheat unless the incorrect mixture of thorium and salt are used. Third, if the incorrect mixture is used and the molten salt gets so hot that it risks boiling, there's a freeze plug at the bottom of the reactor tank that will melt before the molten salt hits its boiling point. When the plug melts, the molten salt drains away into large, passively cooled storage tanks. Besides their inherent safety, fourth-generation nuclear reactors also have greater efficiency and sustainability, and it's much more difficult to use their fuel for nuclear weapons. Let's move on to why fourth-generation nuclear reactors could produce lower-cost power than traditional light water reactors. Once again, we'll use a molten salt reactor as an example. Due to the fact that molten salt reactors operate at low pressure, the reactor containment vessel doesn't need to be as robust, which reduces construction and material costs. Second, molten salt reactors can use a variety of fuels. Most use thorium because it's abundant, and the nuclear waste it produces would have a half-life of hundreds of years rather than tens of thousands of years. But molten salt reactors also have the potential to use nuclear waste from existing nuclear reactors as fuel. However, reprocessing that nuclear waste into fuel could be cost prohibitive. So for now, using thorium will likely be easier. Third, molten salt reactors operate at higher temperatures than light water reactors, so their steam cycle generates electricity more efficiently. Fourth, molten salt reactors require less downtime. That's because the liquid fuel can be pumped out of the reactor while it's running to remove waste products, and new fuel can be added to top up the reactor. That's as opposed to light water reactors, which have a multi-day shutdown and restart process once every several months to replace the fuel, which results in an uptime of around 90% rather than the closer to 100% that may be possible with molten salt reactors. Fifth, many companies are working on molten salt SMRs, or small modular reactors. A typical nuclear plant has an output of around 1 gigawatt, which requires a huge reactor that makes building a nuclear plant a massive undertaking. The maximum size of a small modular reactor is 300 megawatts, but they're usually much smaller. That means they can be produced in large numbers in a factory, which should, in turn, drive down their cost. Furthermore, small reactors have lower investment costs for development, faster construction times, the ability to right-size the power generation for the market or use case, and greater flexibility for where the reactors can be located. With all that in mind, how cheap can fourth-generation small modular reactors get? Let's take a look at Allo Atomics as an example. Allo is developing a 10-megawatt reactor called the Allo-1. Their first 7 reactors are expected to come online before 2030, and the electricity is estimated to cost 10 cents per kilowatt hour. At scale, those reactors are expected to produce electricity at around 7.5 cents per kilowatt hour in the early 2030s. Then, they plan on developing a 100-megawatt reactor called the Allo-2 in the 2030s and scale its production, eventually hitting 2 to 3 cents per kilowatt hour. If they achieve that goal, it would be cheaper to produce electricity from an Allo-2 reactor than a fully depreciated light water nuclear power plant, which currently costs about 3.2 cents per kilowatt hour. Is that goal realistic? There are 2 scaling factors to consider when looking at the cost of nuclear reactors. The first scaling factor is the number of a type of reactor that's been produced. As you can see on screen, after about 7 reactors have been produced, the cost reductions flatten out at about a 35% cost reduction. That's probably why Allo Atomics is planning to build not just 1, but 7 reactors when they start production of the Allo-1. If they built just 1 reactor, the cost would likely be about 16 cents per kilowatt hour or more rather than 10 cents. Then the cost curve flattens out, and they have to build hundreds of nuclear reactors to achieve 7.5 cents per kilowatt hour. The second scaling factor is reactor size. The larger the reactor, the cheaper the cost per megawatt hour of electricity. That's why, in order to hit 2 to 3 cents per kilowatt hour, Allo has to scale their 10-megawatt reactor by an order of magnitude to 100 megawatts. If you combine the effect of reactor size and the number of reactors produced, you get the cost reduction curves we see on screen. After producing several 10-megawatt reactors, the relative specific cost would be about 4. And after producing several 100-megawatt reactors, the relative specific cost would be about 1.6. That is, roughly a 60% cost reduction. And that's how Allo gets from 7.5 cents per kilowatt hour for the Allo-1 to 3 cents per kilowatt hour for the Allo-2. It benefits from both scaling functions by being a moderate-sized reactor with a production volume of hundreds of reactors. But it also means it would be extraordinarily difficult to go from 3 cents per kilowatt hour to 2 cents per kilowatt hour due to the plateau in the cost curve. That 1 cent cost reduction might require building thousands of 100-megawatt reactors. That's a daunting execution challenge that will require Allo and other nuclear startups to either find investors with deep pockets through the early growth stages or find a market for their higher-priced electricity while they scale their reactor output and size to reduce costs. If Allo or any other company can pull that off, they could eventually take market share from solar, wind, batteries, and combined cycle gas turbines. But that's likely over a decade away, because it's going to take that long to finish developing the reactors and scaling their production. And to be clear, that rough timeline applies to all types of advanced nuclear reactors, including fusion reactors, because as the table on screen shows, in the US, all of them are still in development or prototype phases. As a side note, the table on screen only covers small modular reactors in the 50 to 300 megawatt range. If you're curious, here's a second table that covers micro reactors of 50 megawatts or less. Either way, in my view, of all the advanced nuclear reactors, small modular fourth-generation reactors have the best shot at succeeding and reaching 2 to 3 cents per kilowatt hour. But it's not guaranteed. The question is, what are the odds? Let's start with the bull case. First, the U.S. is expected to at least double its electricity consumption by 2050. That demand could mean higher electricity prices to support the development of advanced nuclear reactors. Second, the Department of Energy is investing billions into advanced nuclear power. That includes both billions of dollars for the reactors themselves and also the nuclear fuel supply chain. Third, there's also billions of dollars of private investment flowing into nuclear. According to PitchBook, investments increased by 400% between 2015 and 2022, and it's likely that that trend will continue. Fourth, in July of last year, the ADVANCE Act was passed, which requires the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to accelerate the deployment of nuclear reactors. That's significant because, as I showed earlier, regulation is one of the major cost drivers for nuclear power. Fifth, some industries are willing to pay a cost premium for nuclear power because it offers a constant supply of high uptime electricity that also has very low CO2 emissions. That's exactly what happened with Microsoft's planned restart of 3 Mile Island, which is estimated to produce power that costs about 13 cents per kilowatt hour, which is a 50% cost premium over solar, battery, and gas generation-based options. Sixth, many advanced nuclear reactors can reach much higher temperatures than conventional light water reactors. Those high temperatures are a useful byproduct that can be used by a number of industries, which is called cogeneration. That could significantly increase the value, profit, and therefore viability of many advanced nuclear reactor designs. I could easily do a half-hour video on both the bull and bear case for nuclear, but let's stop at 5 key points for each rather than getting into the weeds. What all this means is that there appears to be strong financial support to incubate advanced nuclear, a strong market for advanced nuclear power, and despite higher initial electricity costs, the economics could work out in the long run. If that all turns out to be true, what could the growth of nuclear look like in the next 25 years? The most bullish forecast I could find for nuclear was from the Breakthrough Institute. They created 4 forecasts for the U.S. power grid that included a variety of cost reduction assumptions for nuclear, solar, wind, and batteries. Their conclusion was that by 2050, advanced nuclear power could make up between 6 to 21% of total generation capacity, and conventional nuclear would drop to almost nothing. But during that time, the total generation capacity of the U.S. is expected to at least double. That means in the next 25 years, the Breakthrough Institute expects nuclear power generation as a whole to increase by 2 to 5 times. In my view, that would qualify as a nuclear renaissance, but it's not likely. Let's move on to the bear case for nuclear. First, regulatory easing may not be enough to accelerate the build-out of advanced nuclear power plants. That's because many of the delays with nuclear plants are construction-related. According to James Krellenstein, the average construction time for 42 nuclear reactors built in China in the last 2 decades was 5.5 years. However, when they adopted U.S. vendors and project delivery methods to install the same type of reactor that was used for the recent Vogtle nuclear plant build-out in Georgia, it took an average of 9.4 years, which is pretty much in line with the timeline that Vogtle experienced. That is, although there are regulatory issues slowing down the progress of nuclear, the construction efficiency of U.S. nuclear projects is also to blame. The second point for the bear case is that there are no nuclear reactors currently under construction in the United States, and those that are planned to be built are experiencing delays from both regulatory issues and, for example, sourcing fuel. Fuel sourcing is an issue for all nuclear plants in the U.S. because the U.S. stopped mining uranium over a decade ago, and much of the fuel for nuclear plants comes from countries like Canada, Kazakhstan, and Russia. The fuel issue is even more difficult for advanced nuclear reactors because they usually have specialized fuel requirements. As I said earlier, the U.S. is working on rebuilding its nuclear supply chain, but that'll take time. The third point for the bear case is cost overruns. For example, the cost to generate electricity for NuScale's advanced nuclear reactor was originally estimated at $55 per megawatt hour. But in 2023, that was revised up to $89 per megawatt hour, and that's inclusive of a $30 per megawatt hour subsidy, meaning the total cost per kilowatt hour is almost as high as restarting 3 Mile Island, and it likely would have ballooned from there, so the NuScale project was canceled. The fourth point of the bear case is that many of the reactors that are being hyped by nuclear bulls are microreactors that can, for example, fit on the back of a truck. As I showed earlier, it requires a certain amount of scale, both in terms of reactor size and production output, to drive down the cost of nuclear power. That means microreactors will always come at a cost premium because they're smaller, so they'll never be cost competitive for 99% of use cases. Rather, as Alo's strategy suggests, they're a stepping stone that will be useful in the late 2020s to early 2030s, which lead to larger reactors in the mid to late 2030s. The fifth point of the bear case also has to do with scale, but in a way you might not expect. What do I mean by that? As I said earlier, in order to reach the scale required to drive the cost of nuclear power down to 2 to 3 cents per kilowatt hour, it could require building hundreds or even thousands of small modular reactors. For example, 1,000 small modular reactors of 100 megawatts each would be 100 gigawatts, which is equivalent to the entire nuclear generation capacity of the United States. In a sense, nuclear power is a victim of its own power density. It produces so much power that it takes a colossal amount of energy demand to bring it to a scale where it's low cost. But as I said at the beginning of the video, the era may be dawning where we need not just thousands, but tens of thousands of small modular reactors. Elon Musk is talking about bringing a terawatt of compute online, which will likely happen in the next 10 to 15 years if history is any guide. In the meantime, solar, batteries, and gas generation are the fastest and cheapest energy to deploy, and they're only getting cheaper. That means they'll have a cost advantage for at least a decade, while advanced nuclear fumbles through its development and scaling stages, and that cost advantage may persist even if nuclear hits terawatt scale. With that in mind, in my view, the bear case is that nuclear generation remains relatively flat between now and 2050 at about 100 gigawatts. If U.S. generation capacity doubles during that time, it would mean that nuclear decreases from about 8% of power generation capacity to about 4%. That would mean only enough advanced nuclear would come online to replace retiring nuclear plants. Lastly, what about the base case for nuclear? In my view, both the bull case of 5x growth in nuclear and the bear case of no growth are equally unlikely. What's most likely is that we see nuclear grow in proportion to the rest of the grid, roughly doubling by 2050. That's because although I expect nuclear will shrink as a proportion of the grid in the next 5 to 10 years due to the growth of solar, wind, and batteries, there's a good chance that nuclear will see a large build-out after 2035 thanks to a more favorable regulatory environment and the development of nuclear reactors that are expected to be highly cost competitive. In summary, it's difficult to know exactly what the future of nuclear power will look like in 25 years because it involves looking at several exponential curves. However, by understanding the individual technologies involved and the overall energy landscape, we can arrive at a fair educated guess. The first set of exponentials are solar, wind, and batteries, which are swallowing up electricity generation market share quickly, and that's only going to accelerate in the next 10 years. This is a near certainty. The next exponential is that, after several decades of stagnation, U.S. electricity demand is poised to double or triple in the next couple of decades due to decarbonization and therefore electrification, as well as new technologies like artificial intelligence and cryptocurrencies. This is also a near certainty. Lastly, although nuclear generation has been flat for many years now, the fact that nuclear plants are being reopened tells us that there's a market for nuclear energy, even if it comes at a cost premium. If advanced nuclear reactors are developed that are cost competitive with or provide support for intermittent renewables and are also safer and easier to deploy, it stands to reason that we could see a renaissance in nuclear power. However, in my view, that window of opportunity is narrow maybe 5 to 10 years at best, before solar, wind, and batteries achieve an insurmountable scaling lead. So, we need to see next-generation nuclear plants coming online in the next 5 years. If not, the best chance for the future of nuclear will be to act as a flywheel for a new civilization on Mars. But that's a topic for another video. If you enjoyed this video, please consider supporting the channel by using the links in the description. Also, consider following me on X. I often use X as a testbed for sharing ideas, and X subscribers, like my Patreon supporters, generally get access to my videos a week early. On that note, a special thanks to my YouTube members, X subscribers, and all the other patrons listed in the credits. I appreciate all of your support, and thanks for tuning in.